It seems in recent years, specifically the last decade or so, goalies have gotten a lot more longer and lucrative contracts than in years past, much to the chagrin of just about everyone online who throws a fit anytime they see a goaltender get a contract longer than 5 years. But just how right are these people, and how often do long-term goalie deals actually work? Hey guys, welcome to Stick and Puck TV. Today we're going to be discussing just that. We're going to deep dive into the history of goalie contracts and how often these contracts work out. For the purposes of this video, we're only going to discuss contracts in the post-hard cap era, so after the 2005 lockout, when the hard cap was initiated. And I'll be counting large contracts as contracts which are higher than 8% of a team's total NHL cap hit. This is the modern equivalent of about a $7 million contract. So now that we're all on the same page, let's jump right into the meat and potatoes. The salary cap was introduced in the 2005-2006 season after the previous NHL season had been forfeited due to contract disputes between the league and the players, known as the collective bargaining agreement. Fun fact though, this was not the first time the NHL introduced the salary cap, as they had done so during the Great Depression, 1930s era times, capping teams at $62,500 and $7,000 per player. But back to the mid-2000s, the NHL had been spending approximately 75% of its revenue on contracts alone, which was much more than any of the major North American sports leagues by far, not even close. But following the implementation of the hard cap hit, contracts were cut by 24%, and teams were forced to comply with a new $39 million cap hit. This destroyed teams like Detroit and the defending Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning, who were spending roughly $70 million on salary. But one of the first teams to sign a goalie to a lucrative contract in the cap era was the Chicago Blackhawks, who took advantage of Tampa Bay's cap shedding and signed their starting goaltender, Andrei Vasilevskiy, aka the Bulin Wall, to a 4-year, $27.5 million contract worth $6.75 million per year, making him the highest paid goaltender in the National Hockey League. Put it into perspective, this was 17.5% of Chicago's salary cap. In the modern day, the highest paid player in the NHL, or who will be the highest paid player, is Leon Draisaitl. Leon Draisaitl is going to be making $14 million per year starting in 2025-26, and that contract is only 16% of the Oilers' cap hit. So Andrei Vasilevskiy was pretty heavily hyped up going into Chicago the next season. However, he was initially extremely underwhelming, possessing a .886 save percentage and a 3.35 goals allowed average, well below the league average for both. Khabibulin improved his save percentage and goals against every season after this, however it was not enough to live up to the hype. Prior to the start of his 4th season and the last year of his contract in Chicago, the Blackhawks signed Cristobal Huet to split time with Khabibulin and even cut Khabibulin in September of 2008, although he cleared waivers and returned to the team prior to the start of the season, so all was good to go. He actually even won the starting job back from Huet, but lost it halfway into the season. But Huet's contract was no small feat either, at $5.625 million per season. Chicago was then in 2008 spending $12.5 million on just their goaltender tandem, the equivalent of 22% of Chicago's salary cap hit. Obviously, Chicago could not afford to maintain this and did not re-sign Khabibulin prior to 2009-2010. Huet did stay with the team, however, and while Chicago would go on to win a Stanley Cup, it was not due to Huet. In fact, Huet was benched during the 2010 playoffs and was taken over by who other than Antti Niemi, another goaltender we've covered on this channel, and you can see that video here. Niemi at the time was making $827,000 per year, so while Chicago won a Stanley Cup, it is clear that it was not due to paying a goaltender more than 8% of their cap hit, but having elite young forward talent in Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. But what about some other highly paid goalies? Roberto Luongo in 2010 was coming off an already monstrous contract, which saw him earn $6.75 million a year for 4 seasons from 2006 to 2010. And in 2011, Vancouver could not afford to pay him that much per year, so they decided to give him term. You see, prior to the 2012-2013 lockout, the collective bargaining agreement did not specify the term to which a player could be given. So to fit a player under a certain annual cap hit, teams would often give players massive long-term contracts that would see their average annual value be dropped to less than what they were worth. One of the most famous of these is another goaltender, Rick DiPietro, for the New York Islanders, who was given a 15-year contract worth $4.5 million annually in 2006. A contract they bought out and will be paying until 2029. Luckily for the Islanders, the 2013 collective bargaining agreement allowed teams to buy out 2 players and for the buyout to not count against the cap. So only the Islanders owners feel the $1.5 million they pay DiPietro every year and for the next 5 years to come. But for Luongo, he was a proven goaltender who was going to continue being a stud. At least the Vancouver Canucks thought so. So in 2010, they gave Luongo a 12-year contract with an annual value of $5.3 million, approximately 9% of the Canucks cap space at the time. Now, unlike Khabibulin's contract, Luongo immediately looked like he was worth the money, boasting a .928 save percentage and a 2.11 goals allowed average. And if Pekka Rinne and Tim Thomas hadn't had such amazing seasons, he would have won the Vezina. However, he did still win the William N. Jennings Trophy alongside Corey Schneider, as Vancouver gave up the least goals of any team in that season. And to make things even better, Vancouver went to the Stanley Cup Final in 2011, the first time they had done so since 1994 and the latest they had done so since. But unfortunately, they did not take home the hardware. Vancouver burned, and Luongo was never quite as good with Canucks as he was that first year of his contract. Luongo would have a falling out with his former team, leading him to admitting that he wanted to be traded, and also admitting the reason why he could not be traded.
My contract sucks. That's what the problem is, and fortunately, it's a big factor in trading me, and it's probably why I'm still here.
But all things accumulated in 2014 when Luongo was benched during the Heritage Classic outdoor game in favor of backup Eddie Lack, who had been performing worse than Luongo up to that point. Luongo would be traded back to his original team, the Florida Panthers, in exchange for goaltender Jacob Markstrom and a few prospects. Now, this seems like a good deal for Vancouver on paper. Unfortunately, this would not be the last time the Canucks would deal with Luongo, as because he retired 3 years before his contract expired in 2019, the Canucks incurred a 3-year, $9 million cap penalty that stretched from the 2019-20 season until the 2021-22 season. This was even worse for the Canucks because that time was when COVID hit and the NHL had a league-wide salary cap halt. So that $3 million wasn't feeling any better across those years. Ultimately, though, once again, paying a big-time goaltender a top high-paying contract did not quite work, because while yes, they ultimately did achieve success, the Canucks did not achieve the goal in paying the player, which is the Stanley Cup. Plus, Luongo did not even stay with the Canucks the entire 12 years and cost them later on in his career. In fact, at the point Luongo was traded, no goaltender had won the Stanley Cup, making more than $5 million a year in the hard cap era. But what about some times where paying a goaltender did work? In 2012-2013, everyone knew that paying a goaltender long-term was a risky move, as they had seen many teams falter from this fate. So many goaltenders now had to really prove themselves, and one of the first teams to do a lucrative goaltender contract and benefit was the Los Angeles Kings, who, after his Stanley Cup winning season, signed Jonathan Quick to a 10-year contract worth $5.8 million per year, or $58 million in total. This was roughly 9% of LA's cap hit at the time. This signing almost immediately paid off as the Kings went to the conference final in 2013 and won the Stanley Cup in 2014. And while Quick's contract did not age the greatest as it went on throughout his career, it all makes it worth it as long as you win the cup. And LA wasn't the only one with this mindset. Chicago felt the same way, giving Corey Crawford a 6-year contract worth $6 million a year in 2013. And while Crawford's first year of his contract was not very good, as he had some of the worst advanced stats in the league, his 2014-15 season saw him raise Lord Stanley's Cup and bring Chicago their third cup in 6 years. Unfortunately, another goalie was getting a huge raise at this time that would not pan out as well. Henrik at this time was already one of the highest paid goaltenders in the league, making almost $7 million a year since 2008. However, following a run to the Stanley Cup final in 2014, he was due for a huge pay jump, and a huge pay jump he would get, signing a 7-year contract worth $8.5 million annually in the 2014 offseason. And while King Henrik would certainly not be bad during his contract tenure, he was never as good as he was from 2011 to 2014, making it only as far as the conference final one time during his contract and eventually being traded to the Washington Capitals, although he would medically retire before ever playing a game for them. The New York Rangers paid Lundqvist to push the team over the edge, but unfortunately, once again, it didn't work out. Around the 2017-18 timeline and era of this contract was when it was really popular online to say goalies should not be paid long-term. And people were kind of right for the most part. From 2006 to 2018, no goalie had won the Stanley Cup with a contract worth 9% or more of a team's cap hit. This would change though in 2021 when a goalie worth almost 12% of his team's cap hit would win the cup. This goaltender was none other than Andrei Vasilevskiy of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who received a $9.5 million contract after taking the 2020's Tampa Bay Lightning to their second franchise's Stanley Cup. In fact, 2021 was the first Stanley Cup final ever to have both goaltenders making more than 10% of the team's cap, as the Lightning were facing the Montreal Canadiens, who also had a highly paid goaltender in Carey Price, who was making $10.5 million per year, or 13% of the team's overall cap hit. In fact, Carey Price is still the highest paid goaltender in the National Hockey League to this day, as he is still getting paid after being put on long-term injured reserve after he would not resolve an injury he suffered during that final. Vasilevskiy would also make another run to the final with the Lightning in 2022, ultimately falling short to the Colorado Avalanche, whose starting goaltender, Darcy Kuemper, was making almost half of what Vasilevskiy was making at just $4.5 million annually. However, this would spark another Florida goaltender who was making $10 million a year in Sergei Bobrovsky to remake a name for himself. Bobrovsky was the second highest paid goaltender in the National Hockey League, and initially it looked to be a mistake, as Bobrovsky would consistently sport below average stats and overall just did not look worthy of $10 million per year. But he was earned his redemption in 2023, carrying his 16th seed Panthers all the way to the Stanley Cup final before ultimately losing to the Vegas Golden Knights. But this wasn't enough for Bob, as he would also lead the Panthers to a top 5 finish in 2023-24, as well as the Stanley Cup, as many of you all know. Meaning paying top dollar for an elite goaltender definitely worked out for the Panthers and Lightning, while almost but not quite working out for the Canadiens. Most recently, goaltenders like Igor Shesterkin, Jussi Saros, and eventually Jeremy Swayman have all gotten lucrative long-term deals, and you often see this ridiculed by traditionalist hockey fans online who believe goalies are replaceable and should not be paid like elite-level talent. And while, yes, it is true, especially in the early years of the hard cap era, goalies with high contracts did not pan out well, that is no longer the case. As the position evolves, more easily qualitative metrics will become available as they have over the past decade or so, with things like goals saved above expected and save percentage on unblocked shots. And goalies are going to start getting paid what they're worth. You will see less disastrous flops like Khabibulin in Chicago or Luongo's final years with the Canucks, as GMs start to figure out what makes a modern goalie good. So, does paying a goalie work out in the long run? It seems to have been figured out now, but if you asked me 5 years ago, I probably would have said no. But in the end, a goaltender is a player just like everyone else. Some flop, some have extremely long, successful careers. To say a player does not deserve a contract based solely on his position is ignorant to the modern NHL, and I'm more than certain these goalies will prove necessary to their teams in the long run, as Huet, Crawford, Bobrovsky, and Vasilevskiy has proved to their fans. So that's it. Goalies are just like any other player and are going to start getting paid as such, as we have seen in recent years. But thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. If you liked this video, I think you will like this one where I discussed the worst single game performance by any goalie in the NHL. I kind of referenced it earlier in this video, but if you didn't click on it then, click on it now. I'm sure you'll love it. Other than that, I'm Stick and Puck TV. As always, my sources are down in the description below. Thank you all for staying so much to the end, and I will see you all next time. See ya.